This story happened 20 years ago. The guys from the philology department had an internship. They were sent somewhere deep into the Russian village, but that's why they were assigned there, because only elderly people lived there, and therefore the internship could turn out to be rich in material, folklore, and all sorts of balichaka, which is a part of a Russian folklore story about an allegedly happening event, mainly about a meeting with spirits. The students got settled, there were 5 of them, at Grandma Dunya's house. She's a pretty, tiny old woman, looking at whom I got amazed. She was so feeble. Also, Grandma Dunya had a rather big vegetable garden and 2 goats to boot. Well, her children helped her with the garden, arriving on weekends from the city. But with the goats, Granny Dunya fought herself. She mowed hay for them right behind the house. Since the house was on the outskirts, meadows begun right there. She also milked, fed, and generally looked after them as if they were her own grandchildren. And in the evenings, Granny Dunya would take an old accordion out of the cabinet, get out to the gate, sit on a bench, and give free concerts. This way she could recall her youth. As she said herself, in 2 days the students weeded the granny's vegetable garden, and after that they got down to their work, collecting folklore. For the whole week, they went door to door and had heart-to-heart talks with the local people. The old people told them a lot of things. Everything was written down in thick notebooks and put in travel bags. And so, when all the stories, perhaps, were retold, and there was still a whole week of internship ahead, the students decided to go hiking in the local forest. Not far, of course, so as not to get lost. In the evening, they packed food, water, matches, salt, a tent, which they had prudently taken from the city, a compass, of course, and in the morning they set off, promising Granny Dunya to return the next day by the evening. The forest was rustling, birds were singing, the sun was shining. Everyone felt joyful. Holidays, entertainment, and rest were waiting ahead. Soon the well-visible path began to narrow, and then it disappeared at all. But it didn't bother anyone, since everything was quite expected. Who could go to the forest there? There were practically no young people in the village. On top of that, the youngest dweller was over 60. The guys strolled, talking about this and that. They recalled some funny stories from their lives, discussed their teachers and group mates, shared plans for the upcoming holidays. Soon, a silver lining between the trees loomed ahead and the tourists decided to take a break. An hour later, the guys moved on. So little by little, the young people went further and further from the village. But the forest was light, deciduous, the weather was good, and the compass worked properly. So the guys decided to go even a little further. Soon it began to get dark and the guys decided that it was time to settle down for the night in order to start moving back home in the morning. In a small space, free from the forest, between 2 spruce trees, they set up a tent and set up a camp. Besides, there was a lake nearby where they could wash up and wash their hands. While 3 people were arranging everything in the camp, the other 2 went to get some brushwood to light a fire. It already became quite dark, as the forest was thicker and there were more conifers. Everything was going well, but suddenly 2 of those who had gone to get some brushwood came running back, screaming and frightening everyone. When they were asked about what happened, the couple replied that it was better to see it firsthand, and the whole company moved in the direction where the frightened comrades were pointing. What they saw looked really frightening. In a round, flat glade where low, dense grass grew, trees stood around the perimeter, and there were babies tied to each trunk, as it seemed to everyone at first. Horror gripped everyone. The guys came closer to find out what happened here, and having examined the babies properly, exhaled and shouted to the girls that they were just dolls. The girls decided to come up and look at everything with their own eyes. There were dolls that hung on the trunks of trees, whitening against the dark background of the bark with white bodies, at the level of human height. These were dolls, very similar to real children. Some were nailed, others were tied with a rope, others were simply stuck between branches. There were no clothes on them. Some had partially or completely missing limbs. Others had torn abdomens and exposed entrails where insects and worms were swarming. There were some greenish blue spots, similar to cadaverous, along their small bodies, but they were all united by one common feature. No matter how mutilated the dolls' bodies were, they all had unharmed eyes, and the gaze of these eyes was so clear that it seemed as if the dolls were alive. Particularly scary was the fact that all the dolls were looking at one point, turning their little hairless heads just at the place where the camp had been set up.
That's creepy.
Lily said at last.
What kind of place is this?
I don't know, Sergei replied, but it looks disgusting. However, it's already dark and we have no choice anyway, so we'll spend the night here.
Anyway, these are just dolls,
Lyoshka agreed,
although they look quite spooky.
The guys, one after another, went back to the camp. The dolls seemed to be following them with the gaze of their dead eyes. At night, they slept badly. The guys every now and then heard some strange rustling sounds, as if someone was crawling around the tent in the high grass that was wet with dew, stomping with small legs and scratching at the walls of the tent with its sharp claws. In addition, the night was quite cold, which was really strange. Finally, it was morning. As soon as dawn broke, the friends got out of the tent feeling cold and hungry. They decided to make a fire to warm up and have breakfast, and then get back home. Suddenly, Vika screamed. The guys who ran up to her saw her pointing somewhere with her hand. There, in the grass, almost right at the tent, there was a doll.
How could it show up here?
Vika asked the others in a trembling voice.
Maybe it's been there before, but we just didn't notice.
Come on, answered Lyoshka.
We would have noticed it when we set up our tent. It's right next to the tent. Guys, I don't like it,
Lily said gloomily.
This strange glade, creepy dolls that have come out of nowhere in the deep forest, this rustling around the tent all night.
Let's eat something and go back to the village,
said Dennis.
I feel uneasy here as well.
The guys had a quick breakfast, put out the fire, and set off. However, having walked a little, friends noticed that the road didn't look the same as it was yesterday. Dennis took out a compass. Its arrow was trembling, got stuck in one place, not moving left or right.
What the hell is going on? Yesterday we walked along this path and everything was fine,
he exclaimed. Others got as perplexed as Dennis was. It was decided to move randomly, navigating by the sun, moss, and familiar places, if there were any. It was already past noon. Everyone was thirsty. Water supplies had already run out, and the village was still out of sight. The girls were crying. The guys bravely tried to find the way. The day passed. The sun was leaning towards the west, when suddenly some light glimmered ahead. The guys hurried towards it. However, it wasn't a village. There was a lonely house in a glade. A big dog was running around the house. Having seen the guys, it started growling loudly.
Boys, come here!
There was a scream and an elderly man came out of the house. It was a forester. He invited the guys into the house, sat them down at the table, and after a tasty dinner started asking about where they were from. The friends told their story and what village they came from. The forester listened carefully to them, and then said,
Your village is about 80 kilometers away from here. Yes, don't be so surprised. I didn't misspeak. Sometimes it happens here. You must have seen how your compass behaved.
The friends looked at each other. The forester looked quite conscious of what he was saying, but his words sounded quite unreal.
And that glade with the dolls? What is it?
Asked Lily.
There were at least 50 of them. Who could bring them to the forest?
Okay, I'll tell you what I know,
the forester said after a pause.
You'll stay overnight here, and in the morning, I will take you to the neighboring village. It's literally half an hour's walk from here. There's a bus that goes to your village once a day. I'll arrange for you to be taken for free.
The guys settled down for the night, and the forester, whose name was Misha, began the story.
There used to be a village not far from here. Now it's completely abandoned. There's nobody there. So once, when life was still in full swing there, a tragedy happened. In one night, babies fell asleep in all houses, and they didn't wake up in the morning. No, they didn't die. They could breathe, but at the same time, they looked absolutely devoid of life. They didn't cry, didn't move, didn't ask to nurse. They were just like dolls. The only thing that proved that they were still alive was their breathing, and even that was very weak. There was no doctor in the village. To get an appointment with a doctor, you have to go to the city, which is about 100 kilometers away. And I must say, the inhabitants of this village didn't particularly like doctors and outsiders in general. They were either some kind of sectarians or whatever. Well, there was an ancient old woman in charge of everything. They revered her like a witch. By the way, I wonder if it was she who made it nightmare, so to speak, in order to raise her authority and power this way. So people rushed to her, asking what to do, and she came to the huts, looked at the babies, and said that death had come to their village, and in 2 days the children would die. But she could save them. People had to go to the city and bring dolls from there, 1 doll for each baby. Maddened by grief, people who completely believed in the old witch equipped 3 carts and sent several people to the city to bring the dolls. The next day, they returned, on carts, in cardboard boxes. There were dolls that looked like living babies, in pink and white lace. Those Days dolls were made really well. So the witch ordered to bring all the babies to the center of the village, put them directly on the ground, and attach a doll next to each baby. People did everything according to what she said, and the old woman announced that now she was going to transfer the death from child to dolls. I don't know what she was doing there, but the children really came to life. They started crying, and the dolls, which the death passed to, the witch ordered to carry them to the forest and to tie them to the trees, whispering some certain words. The villagers, being so happy, did everything that the witch had told them, and slowly life began to return to its usual flow. But only soon people began to wander in that forest, just like you. Some people disappeared, and those who have found their way and returned told about the living dolls that live in the forest, and they told creepy things. I won't tell you everything, but the dolls are really not dead. Someone or something lives in them. They deteriorate over time, but their eyes remain unchanged. I've made sure of it myself. I've already been working as a forester in this forest all my life. Since you've seen it, you shouldn't have any doubts about the veracity of this story. Really terrible things have happened to those who have been there. You guys ended up quite well. You just got lost and that's it. Yes, and those who managed to get out alive say they saw these babies running in the grass at night. Well, these are the things that exist in the local forest. You have to be careful. There's a reason why in such a wilderness, about 100 dolls ended up in the trees, right?
The man asked, pouring some tea to his cup, while we were looking at him and listening carefully to each of his words.
Okay, let's fall asleep. Tomorrow we should get up early. The bus only goes in the morning.
The next morning, the forester saw off the children to the village and put them on a bus. On the same day, the guys packed up their bags and, thanking Grandma Dunya for her hospitality, they left for the city.